Good morning. I want to talk today about the spiritual side of Chiron and how in 2024 we might all get a little boost in that respect from some of the things that Chiron will be doing. So let me go ahead and see if I can share my screen here. And I just need to take care of a few housekeeping measures, get some windows out of the way so I can see what I'm doing. And I think we're ready to go. So I call this Chiron and Spiritual Transcendence in 2024. Now, first, let me explain a little bit about Chiron. Uh, a lot of people, maybe most people, tend to associate Chiron with wounding. But if you think of the planets as representing drives inside of us, it really makes no sense for us to have a drive to wound ourselves. So let's take a little closer look at Chiron. Chiron uh, resides most of the time between Saturn and Uranus. It's a small planetoid or a dwarf planet, and occasionally its orbit goes inside the orbit of Saturn, getting closer to the Sun than Saturn. And at other times, it goes outside of the orbit of Uranus, getting a little bit further away from the Sun than Uranus. In general, I like to think of Chiron as a bridge between the known and the unknown, between what can be seen, the planet's Sun through Saturn, and what can't be seen, Uranus through Pluto. And as such, in its purest form, Chiron represents a very sweet, joyous, and enlightening sensation. It nudges us to go beyond what is plainly visible to us, to transcend the reality that we can see. But to do that, it often has to first crack that hard Saturnian shell that we have erected around ourselves and our version, our understanding of reality. Quite often, that has to be cracked first for this higher light to enter. As I often say, you can't make a cosmic omelet without cracking a few cosmic eggs. Okay, I want to look at a few things in the past to illustrate what I call the sweet side of Chiron. And nothing brings out that sweet side better than a conjunction of Jupiter with Chiron. Jupiter is such a benefic. So it's no surprise that you would get good things happening when Jupiter and Chiron are conjunct. Now, what happens, it's usually something very transcendent that reflects the nature of the sign that the conjunction occurs in. And it's often something very enduring. And the last conjunction we had was in Aries on March 11th, 2023. I'll get back to that in just a minute. But first, going back to the early 20th century, back to the 20s, there was a conjunction of Jupiter and Chiron in Taurus. Taurus is ruled by Venus. That's things we like, things that entertain us. And the transcendent thing that happened during a month that a conjunction was occurring in Taurus was that Philo Farnsworth perfected television. He demonstrated the first fully functional television system. It took several decades for it to become commonplace, but nonetheless, it has endured, and television entertains us every day. In 1945, I believe, there was a conjunction of Jupiter and Chiron in Libra. Libra rules relationships, and in that month, the United Nations was formed. In the early 60s, there was a conjunction that occurred in Pisces, and during that month, the Beatles found their drummer, Ringo Starr, and they became the Beatles that we all know and love. And Pisces, in this case, represents sophisticated music. In the mid 70s, there was a conjunction in Aries. Now, with that kind of conjunction, you would expect an emphasis on individual spirituality and spiritual warriors. And during the month that this conjunction occurred, that was also the month that they began filming Star Wars. And Star Wars is obviously about spiritual warriors, the Jedi Knights, and this new religion, the religion of the Force, which was often seemed to be practiced individually. Every individual had to make their own connection with the Force. In the early 90s, there was a Jupiter Chiron conjunction in Cancer. And during the month that that conjunction occurred, that was when J.K. Rowling got her idea to write a series of novels about a character she wound up calling Harry Potter. Now, on the surface, those novels seem to be all about magic, but what they're all really about is family. Harry's loss of his parents, his rejection by his aunt and uncle and cousin, and finding new family essentially at Hogwarts. And uh, Cancer's all about family. Uh, Later, there was a conjunction of Jupiter and Chiron and Aquarius. And this was actually a triple conjunction of Jupiter, Chiron, and Neptune. And this happened in the year that brought us Obamacare, which reflected both the humanitarian nature of Aquarius and the compassion of Neptune and Pisces. Well, with our recent conjunction occurring in Aries, I was expecting something along the lines of Star Wars, individual spirituality and spiritual warriors. And I was not disappointed because the very next day after that exact conjunction, what was probably anticipated to be a very small movie called Everything Everywhere All at Once, it swept the Oscars to become the most award-winning movie of all time. And it checked all the boxes I had with regard to transcendent spirituality and spiritual warriors. If you haven't seen this movie, I encourage you to rent it, to watch it. It has a lot of wonderful spiritual lessons. There's a lot of fighting in the movie to save the universe. There's also a lot of information about a multiverse. And one of the important message of this movie was that we don't have to keep fighting. We don't have to be involved in this endless, never-ending cycle of fighting where if I win, you lose, and if you win, I lose. Instead, you can scour the multiverse and find a different paradigm, a different reality where it's a win-win situation, where both of you are winning. And then you can make that your reality in this universe. So, wonderful movie. Uh, Reflected the nature of Jupiter conjunct Chiron and Aries. I highly recommend it. Now, let me give one more example from the past of the transcendent side of Chiron. And let's see, I'll just read this here. To give another example of the more transcendent side of Chiron, in 1966, Saturn and Chiron were conjunct and trine Neptune for most of the year. New forms of spirituality often emerge during Saturn-Chiron conjunctions. And this was the year that meditation and Eastern spirituality began to become popular in Western countries. And notice this is kind of a non-physical kind of spirituality that corresponds to this conjunction occurring in Pisces. Also, it's often in music, television, and the arts that we first see the transcendent enduring effects of Chiron. And let me point out, we have this conjunction here in Pisces. It's trine Neptune. This configuration was in effect within Orb for practically the entire year, practically all of 1966. And there were some classic TV shows that reflected this influence. And some of the classic TV shows that appeared that year were Batman, the Monkees, and the ever-enduring Star Trek. Star Trek is the best example here. It's because the good side of Chiron, it gives us things which are wonderful and which endure. And Star Trek has endured throughout the decades. Plus, nothing corresponds to Neptune more than the boundlessness of outer space. Okay, now I have a list here of some conjunctions that Chiron will be involved in for about the first 6 months, 5 or 6 months of 2024. Two concern me in particular. The first one is the North Node conjunct Chiron, which occurs on February 19th, but it's within a 1-degree orb for most of February. Now, whenever the nodal axis conjuncts a planet, it tends to intensify the nature of that planet. And if we go back to the last time that the North Node was conjunct Chiron in Aries, that was in 1969. And were there some wonderful events that happened back then that seemed to be of the nature of North Node conjunct Chiron in Aries? Absolutely. We had the music festival Woodstock. The Beatles came out with their album Abbey Road, and that album has sold over 31 million copies. And 50 years later, in the United Kingdom, it became #1 on the charts once again. And additionally, we had not one, but 2 moon landings in that year. That was the year mankind put a man on the moon, and we had a second moon landing before the end of the year. So there was a lot of, there are things that happened in 1969 which were very transcendent and which have endured in our culture. Now, the other thing I have flagged here is very important, is Sun and Moon conjunct Chiron. This is really important because it's going to be a solar eclipse on April 8th, and Sun, Moon, and Chiron will all be exactly conjunct to the minute. They'll all be at 19 degrees, 24 minutes of Aries. Okay, now I'm not going to say a whole lot about the solar eclipse. I've talked about that elsewhere, but I do want to point out that if anyone or any country has something in a cardinal sign close to 19 degrees, 24 minutes of that sign, then they're going to be impacted by that eclipse. And in particular, the United States is going to be impacted because in the July 1776 charts for America, Chiron is at 20 degrees Aries. So it's definitely going to be impacted by this eclipse. Also, I will be impacted because I have my Neptune at 19 degrees, 18 minutes of Libra. That's directly opposite the stellium of planets that we have in the eclipse. Now, to show you that very good and transcendent and very spiritual things can happen under conjunctions like this, let's go back to the last time that we had a conjunction between Sun, Moon, and Chiron at the time of a solar eclipse. And that was on April 6th of 1875. Here you can see Chiron is within orb of the Sun and the Moon and fairly close to the nodal axis. It's not exactly conjunct, but it's going to have a nature similar to what we'll see in the April 8th, 2024 solar eclipse. And there were 2 very important spiritual things that happened back in this year in 1875. Helena Blavatsky and others founded the Theosophical Society in New York City, and many see the Theosophical Society and Theosophy as somewhat of a forerunner to the New Age movement of the 1980s. Also, Mary Baker Eddy published Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, and that is one of the main texts used in Christian Science. So there were some very important spiritual developments the last time we had this kind of conjunction Aries. So it's not unexpected that there might be some important spiritual developments this time around too. Okay, now as I mentioned, or maybe I didn't, I'll mention now, uh, the United States has, in those July 1776 charts, it has Chiron at 20 degrees Aries, and it is going to experience 3 Chiron returns in the months ahead. 2 will happen in 2024, and the third one will happen in early 2025. Now, I'd like to use a July 2nd, 1776 chart for America. That is the date on which the Continental Congress passed the resolution for independence. If you use a July 4th, 1776 chart, dates aren't going to change that much. For both charts, there will be a Chiron return on April 20th. For July 4th charts, the second Chiron return occurs on November 8th, and the third Chiron return occurs on February 18th. Okay, now, granted, there can be wounding during a period like this, but there can also be transcendent spirituality, as we have seen from some of the previous events that we have looked at. And so these, not only that solar eclipse, but these Chiron returns, these are going to be periods when you individually, if you have laid the spiritual groundwork, you can make a lot of progress by tuning into the energy, the message of Chiron during those times. By the way, April 20th, that's an important date for another reason, because that is also the date on which we will have a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in Taurus. Okay, now these Chiron returns, we've seen them before. Back in the early 70s, from 72 to 75, there were 3 oppositions of transiting Chiron to natal Saturn, followed by 3 Chiron returns. And during this period, there was some wounding. There was political wounding in the country from Watergate. President Nixon wound up resigning. Vice President Spiro Agnew had to resign during this period due to his own scandals. But there was also political transcendence we saw. The work of the Senate Select Committee to investigate Watergate and President Nixon, that was one of Congress's finer moments. Those of us who were alive and watched those hearings on television, we remember those. We remember the eloquence of Barbara Jordan during that period. So even though we got some wounding politically, there was also some great political transcendence that came along. Well, from 2022 through 2025, we're going through the same kind of configuration. We have already had 3 oppositions of transiting Chiron to natal Saturn, and it's about to be followed by 3 Chiron returns. And during this period, the country has also seen political wounding from the January 6th insurrection. We have also seen a president implicated. The current, most recent past president is deeply embroiled in indictments right now. But at the same time, that's not all we've seen. It's not all wounding. we've also seen political transcendence this time around with the work of the January 6th committee. And I would say also a lot of the work that the Justice Department is doing, very fair and balanced and very reasoned. So, again, when things are going on with Chiron, it's not all wounding. It is also uh, great transcendence of one sort or another. Okay, now later on this year, when Chiron goes retrograde, and again, I'm using my July 2nd, 1776 chart, but this is all true for all the July 1776 charts for America. Anyway, here's what's going on. Using a 2-degree orb, the last two Chirons returns for America will span about a 6-month period from October 24th through March 2025. October 2024 through March 2025. Also, transiting Chiron will be within 2 degrees of and reactivating the April 8th, 2024 eclipse point during approximately the same period. Thus, for those who have laid the spiritual groundwork, this could be a time of great healing and spiritual transcendence. So, again, I want to emphasize that Chiron is providing us with a great opportunity this year for the world and for America in particular, if we take advantage of it, if we do the necessary work beforehand to open ourselves up so the light can come into us without wounding us. Now, here's a little bit about myself, a little personal thing about me and Chiron. On June 13th and September 1st of 2023, I had Chiron in opposition to my 6th house natal Neptune. And here I show it for June 13th. Now, fortunately, I did not experience any severe health problems. What did happen was a complete inner spiritual reorientation that's difficult to describe. I also began doing a type of mindfulness meditation for 45 minutes each morning, and I wrote a 72-page spiritual diary of all my insights that I call Thus Spake Christopher. It's kind of written in the style, a little bit of Thus Spake Zarathustra. Okay, so these past two exact oppositions, the period in between, that was a time of really tremendous spiritual growth and reorientation for me, a real period of enlightenment. And this opposition will be exact for me again on April 6th and December 4th of 2024, and on January 23rd of 2025. And I'm hoping for more of the same. Okay, I think that's it for this little slideshow. So let me stop sharing. And again, even though Chiron can bring some wounding, it can also bring healing and spiritual transcendence. And I hope the examples that I've shown you have convinced you of that. And so going into this year 2024, there might be a little trepidation some people will have about Chiron, but it can be wonderful. It can be very transcendent. And it all depends on each of us individually opening ourselves up to these higher energies, uh, letting go of that hard shell that we might have erected around ourselves. If we do, then it will be a wonderful time and a time of great spiritual growth. So, with that said, I'll end my recording. I'll say so long and be well.